There is a stretch of Canada where a house costs less than a used pickup truck, and the for sale sign still leans in the yard year after year. In the north of Alberta, condominiums that once traded at $150,000 were listed for $40,000 or less after the local mine closed. Entire three-bedroom homes sit on the market for $25,000 to $45,000, and in the smallest hamlets, a house can be worth barely $10,000 on paper. This region is bigger than the entire United Kingdom, and most of it holds fewer people than a single Toronto subway line carries in one morning rush. $10,000 for a home in the richest province in Canada. Why does nobody want them? Hit subscribe. I promise this is worth your time. To understand how the North emptied, you have to understand how it filled. A little over a century ago, this was the last great homestead frontier in North America. The Edmonton, Dunvegan, and British Columbia Railway pushed north through the Muskeg in 1915, crawling toward the Peace River country, and behind it came one of the final land rushes on the continent. Families from Ontario, Quebec, the United States, Ukraine, Scandinavia, and the exhausted farms of the American Midwest rode boxcars north through the 1910s and 20s, chasing free quarter sections of some of the most fertile soil in Canada. The government papered Europe and the eastern provinces with posters promising the last best west, and the settlers believed them. They walked the final stretches over the Edson Trail through hip-deep muskeg, buried children along the way, and still they came. Every 12 or 15 kilometers along the New Steel, a town appeared, because that was as far as a farmer could haul grain by horse and wagon in a day. Each town got its wooden elevator, its hotel, its Chinese cafe, its curling rink, its church, and each one assumed it would become a city. By 1934, Alberta had 1,781 wooden country grain elevators, standing against the sky, a picket line of prosperity, running to the horizon in every direction. The North felt inevitable. The second wave came on drilling rigs. Oil transformed Alberta after the Leduc strike of 1947, and the industry marched north through the 50s and 60s. The Swan Hills field turned a patch of boreal wilderness into a company town almost overnight after 1957. The Rainbow Lake field, discovered in 1965 in the far northwest, planted a town at the end of a dead-end highway. Coal built Grande Cache from nothing in 1969, carved into the foothills to feed Japanese steel mills. Forestry mills rose around Lesser Slave Lake and High Prairie. For a few decades, the north of Alberta was a place people moved to. The unraveling came quietly, one industry at a time. Farm machinery grew enormous, and one family with a $500,000 combine could work land that had once supported 20 households. The children those farms no longer needed drifted south. The grain companies abandoned the little wooden elevators for a handful of concrete inland terminals, and by 2017, only about 110 of those original elevators still stood along the rails, roughly 6% of the peak. Branch lines were torn up through the 90s and 2000s, and when the railway left, the towns lost their reason to exist. The oil price collapse of 1986 gutted the drilling camps, and the crash of 2014 finished what was left, taking more than 100,000 Alberta energy jobs with it. Mills closed. Schools consolidated, hospitals shrank to clinics, and clinics shrank to nothing. The people followed the work, to Grande Prairie, the one northern city that kept growing, swelling past 60,000, while the countryside around it drained, to Edmonton, to Calgary, to the oil sands camps around Fort McMurray, where they worked weeks on and weeks off, and raised their families somewhere else entirely. This is the cruelest pattern of all. The North still produces enormous wealth, grain, lumber, gas, coal, but the wealth no longer requires residents. It requires machines, and a rotating cast of workers who sleep in camps and spend their paychecks 500 kilometers away. What remains is a lattice of half-empty towns strung along highways that grow quieter every year, each one still mowing its cemetery, still flying its flag, still waiting. Let me drive you through them. Number 1. The Central Peace Grain Belt, along Highway 49 between the Smoky River and the British Columbia border. This is the country the railway built after 1915, Spirit River, Rycroft, Wanham, Eaglesham, a corridor of open black soil farmland 2 hours north of Grande Prairie, where the fields run flat to the horizon and the wind never seems to rest. Drive it at dusk and you pass the skeletons of the old economy, a leaning elevator annex, a caved-in hip-roof barn, rail grades with the steel long gone, main streets where the hotel is boarded, and the cafe went dark years ago. Spirit River began as a trading post in 1891 and boomed when the rails arrived. It counted just 992 people at the last census, drifting slowly downward, decade after decade. Rycroft, at the junction where the highway forks toward Dawson Creek, fell from 628 people in 2011 to 550 in 2021, and the great wooden elevators that justified the town have nearly all come down. Wanham tells the whole story in miniature. Founded in 1916 as a station on the Edmonton, Dunvegan, and British Columbia line, it gave up its village status in 1999 because there were no longer enough people to govern, and the 2021 census found 141 residents. Its largest employer, the Nupro Wood Products plant, announced its closure in 2006, and nothing of that scale ever replaced it. The county office is the biggest thing left in town, administering a rural municipality from a hamlet the size of a large family reunion. Eaglesham, a few minutes east, follows the same arc, a compact grid of streets laid out for a future that never arrived, where the loudest sound on a summer afternoon is a screen door, and the second loudest is the grasshoppers. The farmland here is still superb. Canola blazing yellow in July, wheat running gold in September, some of the finest soil north of the 55th parallel anywhere on Earth. But the farms have swallowed one another, and the towns that once served 20 families per road serve one. Stand beside the highway in Rycroft on a January afternoon, when the temperature sits at -30 and the sundogs burn on either side of a low white sun, and watch the grain trucks roll through without slowing, hauling to the big concrete terminal 100 kilometers away. The town's own elevators, the entire reason for its street grid, survive only in photographs on the wall of the seniors' drop-in center. In Eaglesham, a 3-bedroom bungalow was recently listed for $45,000, less than a new half-ton truck, and it waited. The land around these towns is worth millions of dollars a section, and it has never produced more grain than it produces today. The towns themselves are worth almost nothing. That is the paradox of the piece. The country got richer as the communities died, because the wealth stopped needing them. Number 2. The Smoky River Francophone District, east of the grain belt where Highway 49 meets Highway 2. Falher, Girouville, Donnelly, McLennan. This is one of the most remarkable cultural islands in Western Canada, a block of farmland settled from 1912 onward by colonists from Quebec, brought north by missionary priests to build a French Catholic countryside 1,000 kilometers from anywhere French. The mission became Falher, and to this day more than half the town can speak French, the highest share of any municipality in Western Canada. Falher called itself the honey capital of Canada, and it earned the title. At the peak, more than 48,000 hives in the district produced 10 million pounds of honey a year, and a honeybee statue, nearly 7 meters tall, still guards the main street. The bee remains. Much of the economy does not. The Falher alfalfa processing plant, which employed up to 110 workers in season, went bankrupt in 2008, and the town has slipped to around 1,000 people. McLennan, a few kilometers east, was a true railway town, named for a vice president of the Edmonton, Dunvegan, and British Columbia Railway, and built around its yards and its junction, where the lines split toward Peace River and Grande Prairie. When diesel replaced steam and the railway stopped needing crews stationed in the north, McLennan lost its purpose. The population fell from 809 in 2011 to 695 a decade later, a drop of about 14% in 10 years. The town calls itself the bird capital of Canada. The marshes of Kimiwan Lake at its edge funnel hundreds of thousands of migrating shorebirds and waterfowl through every spring and fall, and there is something almost too poetic in that. A town built on arrivals and departures, whose most reliable visitors have wings and never stay. Drive through Donnelly and Girouville on a February evening, and you will see the parish churches, enormous and beautiful, built for congregations of 1,000, standing over villages of 200 or 300, their steeples lit against a sky that goes black by 5 in the afternoon. Girouville has slipped below 300 people. Donnelly hovers in the same range. Both keep shrinking by a family or two a year, a rate that sounds gentle until you do the arithmetic on what remains. The Honey Festival, running since 1970, still fills Falher for one weekend every June, and for those few days the town looks like the photographs from the 60s. Cars parked the length of Main Street, children everywhere, French and English mixing on the sidewalk. The other 362 days belong to the wind. In Falher, a 3-bedroom home with 2.5 bathrooms was listed for $45,000, roughly the price of the pickup trucks parked outside the co-op. A century of French-Canadian effort, the clearing of a countryside by hand and horse and faith, priced like a second-hand car. Number 3. The Upper Peace, the North Bank country around Fairview, and the long, lonely road to Manning. Cross the Peace River at the old Dunvegan suspension bridge, climb out of the valley, and you are on a rolling plateau of grain and cattle country that feels emptier with every kilometer. Fairview arrived in 1928, when the railroad extended west, and an entire community picked itself up and moved to meet the tracks. It grew into a proud little service town, a hospital, a college campus, dealerships, a main street with awnings, and peaked at about 3,160 people in 2011. The last census found 2,817, and the slide has not stopped. The college campus that once drew young people from across the region has been passed between institutions and pared back, and every graduating class scatters south. North of here, Highway 35 runs toward Manning, and eventually high level through a corridor where the farms thin out and the boreal forest closes in, and the villages along the way, Berwyn, Grimshaw's outskirts, the hamlets beyond, have been shrinking for 40 years. In Nampa, just south of the town of Peace River, a bungalow was listed for $49,000. The pattern repeats with hypnotic regularity. The school closes first because there are no children. The young families leave because there is no school. The grocery store follows the families. The bank branch becomes an automated teller, and the automated teller eventually goes too, and the seniors who remain drive an hour for milk until they cannot drive anymore, and their houses join the market at prices that would not buy a parking space in Vancouver. The Dunvegan Bridge itself is worth the drive, the longest vehicle suspension bridge in Alberta, hung over a valley where fur traders wintered 2 centuries ago, and it carries perhaps a few thousand vehicles on a busy summer day, and almost none on a dark one. Stand on the main street of one of these villages at 8 on a winter evening, your breath hanging in the streetlight, and count the lit windows. You will not need both hands. Fairview still fights. It markets itself relentlessly. It courts newcomers. Its college campus trains gunsmiths and beekeepers in programs found nowhere else in Canada, and still the census line bends downward, because a town cannot outmarket geography. Subscribe to show that these videos actually matter and make a difference. Number 4. The boreal forestry belt around Lesser Slave Lake, Smith, the Highway 2 corridor, and the mill country toward High Prairie. East and south of the Peace farmland, the fields give way to spruce, poplar, and muskeg, and the economy was never grain here. It was timber and the railway. Smith exists because the Edmonton, Dunvegan, and British Columbia line needed a divisional point where the trains crossed the Athabasca River, and for a while it had yards, crews, a roundhouse, and hundreds of railway families. The diesels came, the divisional point closed, and Smith settled into the long twilight of a hamlet measured in the low hundreds, a place where the river still moves and almost nothing else does. Around the lake, the sawmills and the oriented strand board plants rode every housing crash in American history, hiring through the booms, cutting shifts through each bust of the early 90s, 2008, and the pandemic years. And each recovery called back fewer workers than the last, because the machines kept getting better at jobs men used to do. High Prairie and Slave Lake survive as service towns. Bruised but alive, it is the country between them that has hollowed. Gravel roads run back into the bush toward quarter sections cleared by hand in the 30s and 40s, and at the end of many of them stands a gray farmhouse with a collapsed porch and poplars growing through the granary. This is also fire country. Slave Lake lost a third of itself to wildfire in 2011, one of the costliest disasters in Canadian history at the time, and the smoke returns almost every summer, hazing the sun orange for weeks, a threat that hangs over the region like another quiet tax on living here. The lake itself is enormous, over 1,000 square kilometers of water, ringed by white sand beaches that would be crowded with condominiums anywhere else on the continent. Here the shore belongs mostly to pelicans and the odd fishermen, because scenery has never been enough to hold a population that cannot find work. Older homes in the hamlets along this corridor list in the tens of thousands of dollars, and insurance companies, wary of fire and distance from the nearest hall, sometimes want more per year in premiums than the mortgage itself would cost. In Smith, the old railway hotel burned years ago and was never replaced. The general store hangs on. The school teaches a few dozen children across all grades. The forest, patient beyond measure, is taking the cleared land back, poplar by poplar, one abandoned quarter at a time. Number 5. The Swan Hills Plateau, the high oil country where Highway 33 climbs into the hills between Whitecourt and the lake. Swan Hills is a pure creature of petroleum, incorporated in 1959 as a base camp after one of the biggest conventional oil discoveries in Canadian history, laid out by companies for their workers, 80 kilometers from the next town and more than 200 from Edmonton, at an elevation where winter arrives early and stays. The field was a giant, But conventional fields decline, and Swan Hills has spent half a century sliding down the far side of its own curve. The town counted 1,465 people in 2011 and 1,201 in 2021, and city population estimates have drifted lower since. Its other employer tells you something about how the North gets used. The Swan Hills Treatment Center, the facility where Canada sends some of its most hazardous industrial waste to be incinerated, sits just north of town, the kind of installation that gets built where there are few neighbors to object. The town site today is wide streets scaled for a boom that ended decades ago, a school with more capacity than children, and trucks that thunder through without stopping. Farther south along Highway 43, Fox Creek lives the same cycle on the gas side, its motels full or empty in rhythm with drilling programs decided in boardrooms in Calgary. The setting is genuinely wild. This plateau carries one of the last grizzly populations in central Alberta, and moose wander the townsite in October, but wildness is a consolation prize, not an economy. Houses in Swan Hills list far below what it would cost to build them, often under $100,000, sometimes far under, because everyone buying knows what everyone selling knows. The field is old, the camp jobs rotate workers in and out without settling anyone, and a house here is not an investment. It is a bet against geology, and geology does not lose. Walk the residential streets on a Sunday morning in November, snow squeaking underfoot at -25, and you can hear the flare stacks breathing somewhere out in the bush, the sound of the industry that built the town, still running, no longer needing it. Number 6. The far northwest, Rainbow Lake, the high-level country, and the last farmland in Canada. Drive north until the grain gives out, past the 58th parallel, and you reach a region the size of a small European country with a population that would not fill a hockey arena. Rainbow Lake sits at the very end of Highway 58, 140 kilometers west of High Level, a road that goes there and nowhere else. The town was born to serve the oil field discovered in 1965, and it is dying as that field winds down, from a peak of 1,082 people in 2007 to 795 in 2016 to 495 at the last census, a collapse of nearly 38% in 5 years, one of the steepest declines of any town in Canada. Houses in Rainbow Lake have been listed for less than the price of a snowmobile, and the town has openly courted anyone willing to move, remote workers, retirees, anyone, because the alternative is switching off the lights. Drive that highway in December, and the experience approaches sensory deprivation. 2 lanes of packed snow, black spruce walls on either side, the occasional gas plant glowing like a space station, and 140 kilometers without a single building facing the road. This is a land of brutal arithmetic. At Fort Vermilion, downriver from High Level, the thermometer recorded -61 degrees in January of 1911, a Canadian record that stood for 36 years, and modern winters here still touch -45. Winter darkness runs deep, under 7 hours of daylight at the solstice. The nearest real city is an 8-hour drive, and a furnace failure at those temperatures is not an inconvenience but an emergency measured in hours. And yet the far north holds one astonishing exception: La Crête, a Mennonite farming community south of the river that keeps growing on faith, large families, and stubborn skill, clearing and working the most northerly grain fields on the continent, building new houses, while towns with paved streets and swimming pools empty out around it. Emptiness, it turns out, is not fate. It is the absence of a reason to stay, and La Crête has one, woven from belief and belonging rather than barrels of oil, which may be why it works. Number 7. Grande Cache and the Coal Foothills, where the Rockies rise out of the boreal forest along Highway 40. No place in Alberta shows the whiplash of resource life more nakedly. Grande Cache was built from nothing starting in 1969, a model town on a mountain bench, its mine feeding metallurgical coal to Japanese steel mills. When world coal prices collapsed, the mine shut in 2015, the nearby power plant followed, and the town simply broke. Condominiums that had sold for $150,000 were listed for $40,000 or less. Homes went for $100,000 to $200,000 below their assessed worth. In 2017, a town that used to see 100 property sales a year recorded 3, and at the worst of it, 2 homes were being foreclosed every week. The following September, residents voted on whether Grande Cache should even remain a town. 1,065 of the roughly 1,100 ballots said no, and on the first day of 2019, it became a hamlet, administered from outside. The population fell from 4,319 in 2011 to 3,276 in 2021. The mine has since restarted under new owners, closed again in the pandemic, and restarted once more with a workforce of around 250, a fraction of the payrolls that built the place. Prices have climbed off the floor. A two-bedroom mobile home recently listed for $59,000, townhouses for $120,000, still a fraction of replacement cost. It remains one of the most beautiful town sites in Canada, ringed by peaks, wrapped in caribou country, the trailhead town for some of the wildest backcountry in the Rockies, and it hosts one of the hardest ultramarathons on Earth every summer, when runners pour in for a single weekend and the motels fill. Beauty was never the problem. The problem is that the town's entire existence balances on one commodity price set an ocean away, and everyone who signs a mortgage in Grande Cash is signing a side bet on the Asian steel market, whether they think of it that way or not. Here is the question that hangs over every one of these places. If a house costs $10,000, $25,000, or $45,000, why does almost nobody buy one? The answer begins with winter. These are communities where -30 is routine and -40 arrives most years, where the cold snap of January 2020 saw the north push toward -50 with wind chill, where block heaters are not an accessory, but a survival tool, and every parking spot outside every building has an electrical outlet, because an unplugged engine simply will not turn over by morning. Winter is not a season here. It is a landlord. It runs from late October into April. It dictates when you travel and whether you travel, and it converts every small mechanical failure into a potential catastrophe. Heating an old, poorly insulated house through 7 months of that can cost $400 or $500 a month, which means the furnace can quietly consume the entire purchase price of the house within a decade. The driving is its own tax. Black ice, whiteouts, moose on the highway at dusk, and hundreds of kilometers between services. Distances that turn a specialist appointment or a child's hockey tournament into an overnight expedition planned around weather forecasts. The second answer is distance. Out here, the nearest hospital with an operating room can be 2 hours away on ice, the nearest specialist 500 or 600 kilometers, the nearest airport with a real schedule farther still. Groceries carry freight premiums, tradespeople charge travel time both ways, a plumber's visit can start at several $100s before the wrench comes out. The third answer is the houses themselves. A home listed at $25,000 has usually been empty through freeze and thaw for years. Heaved foundations, burst pipes, mold behind the paneling, a roof at the end of its life, and renovation materials cost more in the north, not less. Spend $150,000 fixing it, and you own a house worth $80,000. Banks understand this, which is why they hesitate to write mortgages on cheap rural properties. Many of these sales are cash only, which filters out nearly every ordinary buyer. And insurers, staring at wildfire maps and distances from the nearest fire hall, quote premiums that can rival a mortgage payment, when they agree to quote at all. The carrying costs never sleep either. Property taxes, utility minimums, water and sewer levies scale to the cost of running a town, not to the value of your house. And in a village of 200 people, the pipes and the plow truck cost nearly as much as they would for 2,000, divided among a fraction of the ratepayers. Whatever you pay, you will almost certainly never sell for more. These markets move in one direction, slowly, downward, and a house you cannot resell is not an asset, it is a subscription. Internet in the smaller hamlets still limps along on fixed wireless or satellite, which quietly disqualifies the remote workers who might have come, and cellular coverage dies within minutes of leaving most highways, an unsettling thought on a road where the next vehicle might be an hour behind you. There is the human infrastructure too, or the lack of it. Family doctors are scarce across rural Alberta, emergency rooms in small northern hospitals close intermittently for lack of staff, and an ambulance can be an hour out on a good day. And beneath all of it lies the reason nobody puts in a listing, the psychology of staying where everyone else has gone. Humans are social animals. A town is a promise that there will be someone to call when your car will not start at -40, someone to teach your children, someone to notice if you fall. When the school closes and the rink goes dark, and the last cafe locks its door, that promise is broken, and no bargain price can repair it. Ask the people who stayed, and they will tell you the hardest part is not the cold or the distance, it is the funerals outnumbering the weddings, the class reunions held in cities far away, the slow understanding that you have become the caretaker of a place rather than a citizen of it. Newcomers sense that grief the moment they drive down the main street, even if they cannot name it, and most of them keep driving. A $10,000 house is not cheap. It is expensive in every currency except money. What happens to the north of Alberta from here? The honest answer is that both futures are visible from the same highway. The emptying has not stopped. The villages keep losing 1 or 2% a year, the elevators keep coming down, and every census subtracts. But there are counterforces, and they are not imaginary. The rural renewal stream of Alberta's immigration program lets designated towns, High Level, the Greenview district around Grand Acache, and dozens more, sponsor newcomers directly to fill real jobs, and communities across the north have signed up. In some of them, immigrant families are reopening shops and refilling classrooms that were headed for closure. La Crête proves the land can still support growth where a community wants to grow. Remote work rescues a scattering of villages within striking distance of Grande Prairie and Peace River, wherever the fiber reaches. There is talk of new energy, natural gas feeding petrochemicals and hydrogen, timber for mass market housing, even the long-promised agricultural expansion as the climate warms and the frost-free season stretches north year by year. Municipalities have grown inventive in their desperation. Some northern towns have offered residential lots for $1, waived taxes for builders, shipped welcome packages to anyone who asks. Rainbow Lake has floated plans to reinvent itself around geothermal energy, drawn from the same wells that built it. A strange and hopeful symmetry, the oil town trying to be reborn through the holes the oil left behind. Some of it will happen, but the arithmetic remains merciless. The industries that emptied these towns are not coming back at the scale that built them, because they no longer need the people. A modern grain farm the size of a township employs a handful. A restarted mine employs 250, where thousands once worked the seams. A gas plant runs on a dozen operators and a control room. Alberta as a whole keeps growing faster than almost anywhere in the country. The province added more people in recent years than at any time in its history, and nearly every one of those newcomers settles within an hour of Calgary or Edmonton, which makes the northern silence feel less like misfortune and more like a verdict. The most likely future is triage. A few service towns holding on, Grande Prairie, Peace River, High Level, Slave Lake, a few stubborn exceptions growing, and the rest sinking slowly back into the poplar and the wild rose, until the last elevator falls, and only the cemeteries keep the town names alive, mowed once a month by a volunteer whose family left long ago. Some evening, if you ever get the chance, drive Highway 49 at sunset in late September, west from McLennan towards Spirit River, with the stubble fields burning gold on both sides and not one set of headlights coming the other way. Roll the window down and listen. The wind moves through the poplars the way it did before the railway came, the way it will after the last of us is gone. The houses cost $10,000 because a house was never the thing that made these places worth living in. The people were, and the people left. Look after yourselves out there, wherever you are watching from.